It was a dark and stormy night, and the Spirit of the Lord took me to a valley of death, a valley where there had been a great battle, and the army of God had been defeated. And the bones of those who had been defeated were laying in the dry air. And the bones had been there for so long that they were dry bones. And the Lord spoke to me and he said, "Can these bones live again?" I said, "Only you, Lord, know the answer to that." And he said, "Tell the bones to breathe and have life." So I told the bones to breathe and have life. And I heard a rattling, the sound of the scattered bones being brought together. And as the bones came together and were gathered, they were then connected. And as they were connected, they were covered in skin again. And then life. Breath was breathed into the dry bones, and the dry bones arose from the ground, and there was a vast skeleton army. The end. True story, it's in the Bible. There's a skeleton army in the Bible. In Ezekiel chapter 37, there's a skeleton army in the Bible. And it's one of those great stories. So we're in this series called Bedtime Stories. And I just thought that this kind of story might not be the best bedtime story, like for your children. And that's true with a lot of the Bible stories. I mean, really, like the reason, think about this. Noah's Ark, not really a good bedtime story. I don't recommend it for a kid's nursery. We keep doing it, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. I know we like the animals, we like the boat kind of thing, but remember, this was a worldwide flood where everybody died. Not a good thing, not really pleasant. The same with maybe this skeleton army imagery, a valley of dry bones, the army of God that had been defeated. But the reality here is God does something really, really cool. He's revealing that he is in the resurrection business. Our God is in the resurrection business, and our God is open for business, and business is good. I want you to hear that. Our God is in the resurrection business, and God is open for business, and guess what business is? Good. It's good. It's really good, because God is really good at what he does. So in this message series, we're taking a look at some of these more obscure biblical stories and unpacking them and seeing what God is revealing about himself. Our God is unchanging, yet ever revealing. And so he's always sharing his story with us, and even better, inviting us into his story and inviting us to be participants with him in his business, his resurrection business. And so I want you to know this today, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what's been done to you, God has life for you. He has new life for you. New life that can begin right here, right now, wherever you are. God has this life for you. So we have a memory verse for this series. It's found in Psalm chapter 107, verse 2. And we'd love for you to join your voice with all of One Church in reading this out loud together and hear God's words coming out of your mouth. It says, "Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story, those he redeemed from the hand of the foe." And so here's the thing, God has a story. And this story of the skeleton army, which we'll read from Ezekiel in just a moment, is really interesting because it's honestly a story that if you have a relationship with Jesus, we all should really be able to relate to. God takes something that is dead and has been dead for a long time, and it seems like there is no hope or possibility of revival, and he brings it back to life. And in the same way, this is the story that if you have a relationship with Jesus, this is the story that you're now a part of. God is inviting you into his story, and his story is the resurrection story. He sent his son Jesus to come and die for us. God so loved us that he came for us, and Jesus came and died for us. And by taking our sin inside of him, our death inside of him, he handled our death on the cross, and it was buried with him in the tomb. And it looked like it was over, that this was the end. But 3 days later, Jesus rose again. And so now because of him and his resurrection and his new life, now we can have new life in him. And so perhaps you know what this feels like. I would assume you do. You know what it feels like when all hope is lost. You know what it feels like when all there is around you is death. You know what it feels like when there is dryness. You know what it feels like when there's no life, no breath. But then Jesus does his thing. See, our God is in the resurrection business, and God is open for business, and business is good. Business is really good. And so we are the redeemed of the Lord. We're the ones who were dead in the dirt. We're the ones who had no hope, and yet he has gathered us together, put us back together, all the broken pieces that were scattered. He picks them up, he rebuilds, he remakes, he reshapes, he reforms, he covers us, and he breathes new life in us. And so now this new life in him, we're the redeemed of the Lord, and we get to tell our story, the story of what God has done, those who he has redeemed from the hand of the foe. And so we're going to break that down, all right? God is in the resurrection business. This is what he does. This is the nature of who he is. He's life giver, the creator. It's the very first thing that we learn about God. In the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible in the Old Testament, it says, in the beginning, God created. In other words, God spoke everything into existence. He said, let there be light, and guess what there was? Light. And so this was how he created. His creation method was the spoken word. Then in the New Testament, in the Gospel of John that tells the story of Jesus' life, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And so we know that Jesus is the Word. He is the creator, the life giver, and he also gives us new life. And this is what God does. He speaks it into us. And so even in sharing this message, there is an opportunity to be speaking life and being a participant in what God is doing. Our God is in the resurrection business. And so when we come to this Old Testament book of Ezekiel, we're at a point in history where the people of God, the Israelites, have been taken off into Babylonian captivity. And so this has been a part of the Israelite story a lot. Our God is a redeemer. He is in the resurrection business. And this is what he does. He's a rescuer. And so with his people, there were times when they would be in captivity and then God would deliver them or redeem them or bring them back. And so at this particular point in history, they had been taken off and they had been exiled. And now God is going to speak in Ezekiel 37, verse 1. And we'll pick it up there. It says, the hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. And he asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then he said to me, prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Our God is in the resurrection business. This is what he does. And so this imagery that we have here in this story is one of death, but not just any kind of death, death in defeat. The Israelite army had been defeated. That's why their people had been taken into captivity. Their kingdom had been overthrown. They were not in charge of their own country anymore. And the people of God were defeated. And in that defeat, there was this death and this dryness. And God asked the question, can these bones live again? You see, a lot of times we feel that way. We look at the death that we are experiencing. We look at the defeat that we are experiencing. We look at the dryness that we are experiencing, and we think that's the end. But God may want to ask you a question today. God may be asking you, can there be life here again? And we can say to him, you, sovereign Lord, no. You, sovereign Lord, the one who is in charge. You, sovereign Lord, the one who has authority. You, Lord, who created it, can recreate it. You, Lord, who are in the resurrection business, can do this. And so God says to him, okay, prophesy. Now this word prophecy, it means to make what was unknown known. So in this situation, what was unknown was, will this death be forever? Will this defeat be forever? Will this dryness be forever? This is what was unknown. And now God was saying, all right, I want you to speak into the unknown and tell them what is known. He says, speak into this and say, the bones will be gathered. The bones will be then connected. The bones will be covered, and the bones will have life breathed back into them, and there will be resurrection. Prophesy. God invites him to prophesy in this situation. And so I want to take the liberty to maybe prophesy just a little bit. Our God can, sovereign Lord, he can. He knows the answers. Our God is in the resurrection business, and where is your death? Where is your defeat? Where is your dryness? Sovereign Lord, can you? He can. Our God is in the resurrection business, and he can, because we know that God is open for business. Our God is in the resurrection business, and God is open for business. We keep reading the next verse, verse 7. It says, so I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of Man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says, come, breath from the four winds, and breathe into these slain that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood upon their feet, a vast army. Now here's something to think about, okay? Right? Now you have this vast army of God that just a moment before had been dry bones that had been left out to rot, that had been scattered by wild animals. And now they've been gathered together, connected, covered, and the breath of God has now come into them. Our God is in the resurrection business, and our God is open for business. This is what he loves to do. Now, I just want you to think about this particular type of army. All right, technically, it's not a skeleton army because he did put skin on them. Thank you, Lord, for that. But let's just imagine that you were one of the enemies of this army, and you had been the enemy who had defeated this army in this particular way, and it had been a rout, and you had destroyed them, and you had slaughtered them in this valley, and you had left their bones out there, and they'd been out there for so long that they had dried up and been scattered all over the place, and it was a long since conclusion that this victory was final and complete, and yet now all of a sudden, God, who is in the resurrection business and open for business, shows up, gathers the bones, connects them together, covers them, and breathes life into them, and a vast army arises. Quick question. Do you want to fight that army? That's just something to think about. The army that's already experienced defeat, the army that's already experienced death, the army that's already experienced this dryness that is now alive again? You see, their God is sovereign. See, that's who we are. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. Those who have been rescued from the hand of the foe. This is your story. The story of the dry bones is our story. This is who we are, the people of God, adopted sons and daughters who now have access to the kingdom through a relationship with Jesus. Now we have a room in the Father's house and a seat at his table and a common identity. This says no matter who you are or what you've done or what's been done to you, no matter what your defeat was, no matter where your death came in, no matter how long your dryness has been, our God is in the resurrection business and our God is open for business. And this is the new life and the resurrection that we experience as he breathes new life into us. He breathes this new life into us and we're not alone. You see, we are a people. That's the thing about this death and defeat and dryness. There is such an aloneness to that. Such an aloneness to this when we feel scattered. But what God does is he brings us together. And one of the things he does is as he puts the bones back together and then he covers us with the body. And if you take the imagery just a little bit with this, the church, the family of God, the global body of Christ, the family of Christ, we're called the body of Jesus. This is our covering. This is what he's inviting us into to be a part of. And this is a vast army of God that doesn't need to be afraid. Doesn't need to be afraid of any political power, doesn't need to be afraid of any of life's circumstances, that doesn't need to be afraid of economic downturns and changes, that doesn't need to be afraid because we have been raised to life. That's good. And we have been gathered and connected and covered, and he breathes life into us. And so our God is in the resurrection business. And our God is open for business, and business is good. Business is good. The next verse, verse 11, says, "Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord. When I open your graves and bring you up from them, I will put my spirit in you and you will live. And I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken and I have done it, declares the Lord." You will know. You will know. The Lord here, this word for the Lord, the sovereign Lord, this word is the word Yahweh. It's YWHW. There's no vowels in it out of reverence for who God is. And this is the name that God gave himself when he revealed himself to Moses through the burning bush in the wilderness before Moses went back to Egypt and God delivered the Israelites from Egyptian captivity. Moses said, who are you, burning bush? Who am I say has sent me to you? And the name that God gives himself is Yah. Yah. Say that with me. Say Yah. Yah. Try it online. Say it. Yah. Yah. It sounds like breath because what the word means, Yah, it means I create, I cause to exist. It means I am. The actual translation is I am. I am who I am. So who are you, God? He said, I am. Before you were, I am. Before anything was, I am. After everything is, I am. Who are you? He is the breath of life, the very breath of life. And yet a lot of times we forget. You see, that's the cool thing about this name Yahweh, the breath of life, is that every time we breathe, we're actually proclaiming that there is a God. There is one who is greater than us, the one who creates, who causes to exist. The simple breathing that we do. I mean, even thinking about this, thinking about the times where you remember breathing, because typically we don't remember breathing. It's one of these activities that just happens. Like the only time you think about breathing is when you can't breathe. One other time that I really remember breathing was when my wife was giving birth to our children, and I was there helping her. I mean, we were really focused on breathing. Me mostly because of the pain, because she was squeezing my hand. Woman, let go of me. Why do you have superhuman strength? You should feel sorry for me, no? You focus on that breathing, but that's a life-giving moment. And I just think it's really neat that in those life-giving moments, the way that we help go through that is by breathing. We want to breathe. But that's the thing, when there's great pain, breathe. When you're grieving and you're crying, breathe. This is what God is inviting us to do, is breathe. And the times that we think about breathing are the times we can't quite catch our breath. I remember the first time the wind got knocked out of me. Isn't it interesting? I don't think this has happened to me as an adult. I don't know what changes. Maybe we just get smart and stop doing dumb things. It feels like it was a regular occurrence when I was a kid. Once a week, a couple times a year, something. I was getting the wind knocked out of me. I couldn't breathe. The first time it ever happened, me and my buddies, we had ridden our bikes and we were playing on this giant mound of dirt at a construction site. And we were climbing up to the top and we were wrestling, kind of playing this kind of king of the mountain kind of thing, which is where it always goes bad, king of the mountain. That's the whole metaphor for life right there. Everybody's playing king of the mountain. Somebody's going to get thrown off the mountain. Well, that was me. I flew off the mountain, and I knew this was dangerous. Why am I up on this dirt pile? There's no way my parents would allow me to play on this mountain of dirt. And now I'm falling, and there's that kind of free fall where you're like, yep, this is it. I'm dead. just backwards, into the abyss. This is it. My whole life is over. Dead at 6, had a good run. And I land on my back and land right on my back. Ooh, and the wind got knocked out of me. And I was like, I knew it. I'm dead. And when there is no breath, that's what it feels like. It feels like death. And yet, God has breath because God is breath. And as we become more mindful that God has given us breath, then maybe we can enjoy that breath too. You ever think about that? If the only time we think about life and breath and who God is and life giver and that our God is in the resurrection business and he's open for business and business is good, let me tell you, every time we breathe, this is a living testimony to who God is, the life giver. And if the only time we stop and celebrate that or even think about it is when it's gone, what a waste. But every day we have the opportunity to breathe and breathe life. And as we breathe, to also be participants, let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story, those he has redeemed from the hand of the foe. And that's why we can speak just like God would speak life. God would create everything. I am, he says, Yahweh. I create, I cause to exist. You don't get to define me because he defines himself. Well, we too are now invited into this identity with him where we are a part of his family and who he is. And so if our God is in the resurrection business and our God is open for business and business is good, then the business that we're in is the family business. And it's the life business, the resurrection business. And so here's the thing. We too can speak life. That word prophecy means to speak what is unknown, to speak what is unknown. And to make what is unknown known? Well, let's face it, don't we live in family dynamics where what is known, what is unknown about God we know and can make known? Don't we live in neighborhood dynamics where there are people who don't know that God is for them, not against them, where we have the opportunity to speak life and share what is unknown and make that known? Don't we have working relationships where there's people who have no idea that there is a God who is madly, passionately, head over heels in love with them, and that he has an identity for them and new life for them and a community and a family for them, where we could speak life and make what is unknown known? And so we have the opportunity to speak life. And so as we think about that, then let's be intentional with our words. Let's speak life obediently. As we hear from God, as God stirs within us and says, yeah, share something here. Step into that. Don't run away from this. A lot of times we run away from those opportunities because it's a little weird, it's a little freaky. Hey, man, it's probably not a skeleton army. We got that going for us. It's probably more like a relationship that you have and somebody you've probably been praying for and somebody that God is wanting to love through you. And you have good news to share. That's the best part of all. And so as God kind of says, hey, now's the time, he's put his spirit inside of us and his spirit stirs inside of us, then just say something as simple as, hey, you know what? God really loves you. God really loves you. To be obedient in that and to step into it. Not only obediently, but be attentive. We can speak life attentively to people, paying attention to what's going on around us. That's why I love that at one church we pray for one. It's a big, bold communal prayer of faith that we pray as a family. It goes like this: God, please give me one person to share your love with. Would you pray that out loud with me? God, please give me one person to share your love with. Well, this is a prayer that we have great faith that God will answer because we know our God is in the resurrection business and our God is open for business and business is good. And so he's inviting us to step into this with him. If we ask him, God, will you give me someone today to share your love with? He's going to put people in front of us. He's going to redirect our paths. So as we're obedient and we go where he says to go, when we have our heads up, we're attentive, we're paying attention what's going on around us. That's why we get our heads up. We actually look at people. When we're praying for one, people are no longer, objects to be avoided. They're no longer nuisances that we have to deal with, or rather they're objects of God's love moving through us. And let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. And so we're obedient, we're attentive, and then we're expectant. Do this expectantly. Expect, like God really can't do this. So, I mean, like even as in the story of the dry bones and the skeleton army, here the prophet is like, okay, God says, hey, speak to them and prophesy this to them, and then call on the breath and have it come. That there was an expectant thing. If God says to do it, then do it. I mean, we have the best news ever in the history of the world to share. We ought to share it like it actually matters. Like it really matters, and it really is real, and it really is for people. And in that, I mean, then we don't have to be apologetic about it, because it's full of grace and mercy and love and goodness and hope, freedom. This is such a joy to share. It's a sharing of good news, and there's an expectant nature in sharing good news that the people we're sharing that with are desperate to hear it. Just like we're desperate to hear it. Where you have death, where you have dryness, where you have defeat, God can speak into that and bring new life, because this is what he does. And in the same way, we can share these words to others. And so I want to encourage you. God hasn't given up on you. And God hasn't given up on our world. And that means that God hasn't given up on your family. And God hasn't given up on your neighbors. And God hasn't given up on your friends. And God hasn't given up on your coworkers. And God hasn't given up on our communities or our country. God hasn't given up. So let's not give up either. Where there is death and defeat and dryness, there is breath to come. Yahweh. And every day that you have breath in your lungs is an opportunity to speak life into your world. And remember that God is for you, and he has proved it by sending his son Jesus. That Jesus would come and make a way for us all to have new life in him. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. Those he has redeemed from the hand of the foe. I want you to know that can be your story right now. You're invited. He has life and breath to breathe into you right now. And as a church, he gathers us. And as a church, he connects us. And as a church, he covers us. And we're a part of his body. And he breathes his life into us. We're not doing this alone. There is a place for you in God's kingdom. A place that he has made for you, where you belong, because our God is for you, and our God is in the resurrection business, and our God is open for business, and business is good, because he is good. And so right now we have an opportunity to say yes to him. One of the ways we do that is by sharing in communion. And as you worship with us online, even if you don't have bread and juice, you can participate in this time of communion by remembering what Jesus has done for you. Jesus took bread and he broke it. And he offered it to his friends and he said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Take and eat." And so you're invited to say yes to Jesus right now, yes to his resurrection and yes to his life. Take, eat, say yes. Yes. And he also took a cup. He said this cup represents a new covenant, a new promise. It reminds us of Jesus' blood and the death that he experienced for us. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. This is our story, the story of our relationship with the Lord, but not just any Lord, the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. So if you're saying yes to Jesus, we drink to the King. Right now, right where you are, if you would just take some time to breathe. For real, take a deep breath in the nose, out the mouth. Be still, and breathe. Breathe the breath of life in the nose. And when you go out the mouth, say, yeah. Yeah. Would you worship him that way for a few moments?